Welcome back to another episode of the D-League, episode 13 today, with another exciting topic. Today we're going to talk about esports. Well, not a recent trend, but esport has been booming recently with huge prize pools and a lot of players trying to get into the esports scene and become successful. But first, before we talk about the current esport games, Bilal, what do you think, or how do you define esport for yourself?
Okay, well, so what you think of when you hear esport, at least what I think of is like, big games with tournaments that are, that have huge prize pools, etc. But I think in order for a game to be an esport, it just needs to have some sort of monetized challenges or like competitive plays, like tournaments. With money prizes. So anything that's hosted where people can earn something for winning, I suppose, by playing the game.
Okay, yeah, I agree that it's mostly about just having kind of competitive tournaments and gaining money. Um, I uh, I think there is a difference between competitive gaming and esport.
Mm-hmm.
I think some people or some media outlets are using both, like for the same thing. Uh, for me, esport is competitive gaming, but competitive gaming doesn't necessarily needs to be esport. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, you can have games that have a community and that have tournaments, but it's more about just like playing competitively for fun and not for money. For example, if you have a really old game um, where maybe the publisher has gone bankrupt, or um, well, if the game is, let's say, 7 8 years old and you're not maybe there's a sequel, then yeah, the publisher won't push the game very much, I think. So
Mm-hmm.
there's not much money to gain, especially as if the game is really old, then it's also probably not as popular, and you don't have many sponsors involved. So you can have like competitive tournaments where people try to be the best, but in the end, it's not about money. Or maybe there's like a prize pool of maybe $400, $500. So pretty small
Mm-hmm.
prize pool. While, yeah, like you said, esport, it's, I think, um, esport in general, like the term, how people define it has changed over the years, um, as the video game industry became larger and larger,
Mm-hmm.
since pretty much when you had games before the 90s, you had the arcade games where people played competitively to gain the high score. But then I think in the 90s is where I guess the classic esport, or like the classic esport genre popped up, actually.
Mm-hmm.
So something like first person shooters, real time strategy games, fighting games, um, yeah, stuff like that, where you play directly against an opponent. I guess strategy games and first person shooters are more, well, personal computer games. So something you play at home, while fighting games were something you play in the arcade. Um, and yeah, if you take a look at which games are popular right now, or genre that are popular being played competitively, those are pretty much still the same
Mm-hmm.
since the 90s. Just that like the whole industry has kind of changed to be more professional. Um, so yeah, I think today competitive gaming and esports are not the same.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I think I have the same like mindset on that. I think that they, um, I mean, yeah, I think the big difference is that like, well, the term esport doesn't really mean that it's a game that can be treated like a sport and that it has skill, but rather I think esport is like a term where, I mean, all terms kind of get evolved by the usage, and it seems like esport is kind of evolved in a way where it's just all about monetization basically. Because I mean, like, there are lots of competitive games out there that we don't really think of as esports because maybe their tournaments aren't really monetized in general. You don't like nobody you don't see like anybody getting rich off of, I guess, playing like a smaller game like I don't know, like whatever theoretical game I'm talking about.
Age of
Um,
Empires 2, for example, for strategy games,
mhm.
I guess.
Yeah,
Or
I mean,
Warcraft 2.
yeah, honestly, I mean, you don't really hear that for many strategy games other than like StarCraft 2, both of those games. I mean, does anybody
But
really?
StarCraft 2 is not really that old, I guess.
Yeah,
In
yeah,
esport terms,
but
it is.
yeah,
But
in terms of, oh yeah, I'm just saying you don't really hear, yeah, about anybody making money off of something that isn't StarCraft in the RTS genre. I think. I mean,
mm,
right? I mean, like, what other RTS are really esports at this point? I mean, there are MOBAs, but yeah,
I guess if you live in China, you can play Warcraft 3, but that's only in China,
mhm.
or Brood War in Korea. So I guess it's also very regional concerning older games,
Hmm.
where the games kind of created esport in these countries.
Yeah,
So I guess I think in Europe you still have stuff like Counter Strike 1.6 tournaments. They're not that big, but people still play that old game
yeah.
because it kind of was the main game in Europe for a really long time.
Hmm.
So of course it's like if you have soccer and then you have soccer 2.0, uh, maybe some people won't like the rules or some changes, so they say, nah, soccer 1.0 was more skilled, so I'm gonna stick with that.
Yeah, exactly. That's, I mean, yeah, like I mean, you personally got annoyed by changes in like StarCraft 2, right? So I mean,
Yeah, pretty much,
yeah.
yeah.
So honestly, yeah, I think I I'm a lot worse at Brood War than I am at StarCraft 2, but I think I like the design more in general. But yeah, I don't know. Because I mean, StarCraft 2 kind of has a lot of turtling, and I don't know. It's like I like the idea of having a small amount of units and also not having as many turtle strategies, I think. Unless, I mean, I don't think there is as much turtling in Brood War as
Hmm.
there is in StarCraft 2, but I don't know for sure. I'm not that great, so
Uh,
anyway.
yeah, I think let's start from the beginning because today, as we're gonna talk about esport, I think to understand the situation today, you also need to understand the situation in the past.
Hmm.
So how esport was kind of uh, how competitive gaming actually became esport, and I think it all started with first person shooters. So something like I guess with Doom. Doom kind of took over. Well, I was too young to play it in companies, but I read a lot of articles that Doom pretty much stopped companies from working because people installed the game on company computers and they played it on LAN.
Yeah.
So they played it at work, and then it did their own tournament. They did an like they pretty much organized a tournament with a prize pool, and then it continued on to Quake 1. So the difference was that Quake 1 was kind of the first really big 3D first-person shooter,
Mm-hmm.
and so that also, like, after Doom was really successful as a game, Quake became like the new standard for first-person shooters, and again it continued that it would do Quake tournaments. I mean, you still have QuakeCon today, so yeah,
Yeah.
like that is um, kind of a tournament series that started way in the 90s, and because Quake was so popular and so successful, also Doom and Quake were the first shooters to have net play. So if you had a modem, like a dial-up modem, then you could connect to servers online, and of course, some people play casually, but then you had duels and so one-on-one,
Mm-hmm.
and that became the tournament standard for first-person shooters. So Esport for FPS pretty much started with the arena first-person shooter genre, and with net play, um, and yeah, with strategy games, it was kind of the same, because I mean, strategy games as well. If you play multiplayer or you just play skirmishes against computer, it's still a versus mode. So you want to see who's better, or you need to defeat somebody to win. And so, well, for RTS, I'm not sure um, where competitive gaming all started. Um, I'm not sure if Command and Conquer had big tournaments in the past. I don't think so. I mean, I'm talking about something like Red Alert 1, maybe Tiberian Sun,
Mm-hmm.
but some. I guess the best examples were probably StarCraft Brood War.
Yeah.
I'm not that. I don't know too much about Warcraft 2, but because there are still tournaments today, I guess there were online tournaments in the past as well. Um, and for Brood War, even when the game came out, you had the ladder to play online, and there were um, online tournaments where you could win real money. So even though you didn't have um, real professional teams like today, but as a player, you could play online and you could make some cash from playing online tournaments with sponsors. Um, so yeah, I guess RTS started out that way, and well, for fighting games, it pretty much all started with Street Fighter 2, which boomed in pretty much every region of the world.
Mm-hmm.
I guess fighting games are still most popular in Japan, and I think more recently also in the US. I mean, the fighting games were popular in the 90s, but then they kind of vanished outside of Japan. But now the genre is back again, and I mean, in the 90s, pretty much everyone played Street Fighter 2 or had played Street Fighter 2. So I know that Capcom did their own tournaments, and you had arcade. You had arcade tournaments where you like, for example, you had the Super Battle Opera, which was organized by the Famitsu magazine, so a game magazine, and that was kind of like the world championship in the past because Japanese players were the strongest, and then you had a qualifier in the US and in the EU for some games to send a team. And so that was kind of like you had small scenes, and there was not that much money involved, so very much people played for the passion. And some publishers, like I said, Capcom did also some bigger tournaments. Like they did a Street Fighter Alpha 3 qualifier in Japan and one in the USA. And then they flew the winner from Japan to the US to play the American champion. So stuff like that. And it was on Japanese television and stuff.
That's
so
really cool.
Those were kind of the beginnings in the 90s. And what's your impression of that? Do you think that's professional?
What do you mean by professional? Like in terms of elaborate?
What I mean of professional is like the whole. If you talk about esport, then you think of professionalism, right? So playing games professionally,
yeah, like a pro
for
like
a living,
like a pro player.
Or you're sponsored, or like there is a market actually. Do you think would you say like in the 90s, it was professional?
I mean, I think yeah. So I don't know much about it, but I think my description for a pro player is that at the current point in time, like they are currently a professional player if their main source of income is playing that game, because I mean, like anybody could probably, not anybody, but a lot of good players could play a small tournament and earn money from it, but then probably be a small prize pool. I mean, like most tournaments have a very small prize pool unless they're the main ones. So I mean, very few players actually get the opportunity to be professional. So I mean, I think in the 90s it was probably even more polarizing, where you were either very good or not good. I mean, obviously there was an in between, but I think that's more nowadays because back then, like, think of how niche video games were not, and we're talking about video games, and then we're talking about competitive games, and then like playing multiplayer, which is like very niche as well, and then esports, and then competitive players, or sorry, professional players. Like, I mean, you probably had like 5 professional players or like 10 professional players because of how small that community was. So I mean, I think yeah, you could consider, as long, I mean, if they were not working anywhere else and they were just like doing these games as like a main source of income, I mean, yeah, I'd say for sure that they were professional. But yeah, I mean, obviously I wasn't there to see it, so I can only guess based on that information. But yeah.
Yeah, just what I wanted to hear is like if you say, yeah, that's professional or not compared to today, because yeah, like you said, you don't you were not there to experience it. I mean, for me, I grew up in the 90s, but professional gaming kind of passed me by
Yeah.
for quite a long time. So like even in the early 2000s, I didn't even know that there were online tournaments. So I guess the problem was that internet access was not as widely accessible as today.
Yeah.
And it was more expensive because you had to pay per minute.
Yeah.
So no flat rates. So yeah.
We had dial up for the longest time. I mean, I'm trying to think. I think it was up until I was in like middle school something. I don't know. Probably around like 7th or 8th grade is when we got like real internet, and it was shit, but it was not dial up. So I mean we were able to use like Nintendo DS Wi-Fi and all that. So
Hmm.
and so yeah, I mean like we were on dial up for so long that we couldn't really play anything multiplayer. So yeah, I mean, and I mean, we obviously could afford it. We just didn't have it because I mean, I was obviously I was a kindergartner. I didn't have a say
Hmm.
in if we get internet or not. So yeah, I mean, definitely a huge impact from the accessibility of internet on like multiplayer and who played it and whatnot. Actually,
Yeah.
I mean most of the tournaments were played in LAN, right? Actually, I mean, tournaments nowadays are even played in LAN, correct? I mean, LCS and I mean, is the L?
Not.
I think the
Yes, sir.
LCS is actually played in LAN. I hope I'm not making that up. Isn't the? I mean, I think the international is right, at least because they added LAN functionality to Dota, and it'd be kind of silly if they were all in the same internet connection and they were playing through the multiplayer relay
I'm
server.
not sure if those are actually played on LAN. I know StarCraft 2 has no LAN mode, so if there is a StarCraft 2 tournament, it's always online, even if people sit next to each other.
Even the World Championship, they don't like make an.
No, there is no LAN mode. There is nothing.
I think no, because I think League, yeah, League does not have a LAN mode, but I'm
They have like a debug.
I think yeah, I think they have a LAN mode built in for like their tournaments, but I'm not sure on that. I might be making that up, but yeah, I don't
Now,
know.
people were begging Blizzard to include the LAN mode, but they never implemented it. So
It's kind of
uh,
weird.
I think it is always online.
Okay.
So yeah. Um, and for Dota, I'm also not 100% sure, but I don't. I also think it's online because if it has a LAN mode, but I think if you use LAN mode, then you are not able to spectate the game uh, when you are uh, online on the server. So, for example, if you host a game on LAN and then you say, "Here, I'm playing with friend A on LAN," you can spectate. Then, if the other guy is not in your network, he's not able to spectate, I think, and that's why they also play online. So else, if you buy, in the past you could buy tickets to watch tournaments, and I think if it's LAN, then that's not possible. You're not able to spectate in game.
That's that would make sense actually.
Yeah, I think that it's that way. Don't like I said, I'm not 100% sure, but I think Dota 2 is also played online as well.
Yeah.
And I think hmm, I think the only genre where they um,
Play on
where they
LAN.
pretty much play on LAN is probably FPS and fighting games.
Okay, yeah, I figured you'd mention fighting games. 'Cause I mean, like, yeah, everybody was always meeting for those anyway. And
Yeah, you
since
just play on the same console with two players.
yeah, uh-huh.
So yeah, but for FPS, I think well, it doesn't really matter too much. As long as you have a dedicated server. So like if you have a computer hosting the game, and then the players connect to it, and they are on the same in the same network, then they have a ping of 1 millisecond or 2 milliseconds,
Hmm.
and then you just make it. You just host it online, and then people can spectate. I think so. It has no effect on the ping. So it's kind of LAN and online pretty much. So the players are playing on LAN, but you are able to spectate because the server is hosted online.
Oh yeah. That makes sense. Yeah. Okay. That would be an easy solution then if they wanted LAN. Anyway.
Yeah, and I think like LAN tournaments were much like you said, because internet was not that widely accessible.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Playing at LAN parties was much more popular in the past. I mean, today, for example, if you play StarCraft 2, if you have the same lag, if you sit next to somebody, uh, as if you would sit at home and you would play against the same person, like you live in Germany and the other guy lives in Norway, yeah, and the ping is identical. If you sit next to each other, yeah, then of course why would you go to a LAN party, right?
Yeah. Unless you really want to see your friends, I guess.
Yeah, pretty much. I think it's just pretty much fighting games where you cannot kind of rely on playing online because the games are so ping dependent. So if you have more than 16 milliseconds of ping difference, then yeah, the game is already very different than playing offline. So yeah, I guess that's one genre that will probably stay offline as an competitive genre for a longer period of time than the other games.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Yeah.
So
Go ahead.
yeah, we talked about the 90s, and well, then early 2000s, as internet became more widely available. We had a DSL flat rate when I was like 13, maybe 13, 14. So
Mm-hmm.
2003, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
2003, 2004, in rural Germany, so small city. And yeah, that was the time when Warcraft 3 was released. So Warcraft 3 was also very popular in Germany because more people were actually able to play online, and you didn't have to pay per minute. So you could play as much as you want. And yeah, I guess that kind of was the time when playing video games was actually more how should I say, it's well, not really available, but let's say it was not as financially it was more financially sustainable because you
Mm-hmm.
didn't have to pay, so you just had to have a computer and have it plugged into the internet.
Mm-hmm.
um, and yeah, so as DSL flat rates were expanding in Germany, at least, you had a bigger crowd of players actually trying to play online as well. So yeah, I think there were Warcraft 3 tournaments in Germany, at least for a very long time, and there's one Twitch channel, Back to Warcraft, that is also organized by a German player. So yeah, you can kind of see what impact like the internet flat rates had in Germany. That even though the game was released, I think in 2002, there are still Germans playing that game competitively or streaming tournaments, and they can actually make money from that.
Yeah.
So it's kind of nostalgia today.
Yeah. I remember we used so this is kind of a sidetrack, but we back when we had dial-up, there was this game called Neopets that we play online, and you would and they were like it was like basically a series of mini games, and so before playing a mini game, obviously you had to download all the data like onto RAM. And so since we were using dial-up, we would like open one game and it would take like an hour to load. So we'd open a game and leave it and wait like an hour before being able to play it, just because of how slow AOL was. Anyway, but yeah, just to add to the in terms of nostalgia, I guess.
Yeah, I think people stopped playing against dial-up players then because the connection was way worse playing on dial-up. Or I remember that if you were online on dial-up, you could not use the phone.
Yeah.
So somebody was connected to the internet. So like you play an online tournament, and then you're somebody from your family is shouting at you, yeah, disconnect. I need to make a call. So yeah,
Yeah, you like I remember starting a game and like and while hearing my dad on the phone, and I'd like forget, and I'd like launch the thing, and then like I'd start hearing those annoying AOL noises, and I'd be like, oh, should I just just destroyed his call? Oops.
Yeah. So in the early 2000s, I think the most popular games were probably, or at least in Europe, it was Quake 3, Unreal Tournament for FPS. No, also Counter-Strike. Counter-Strike was huge. I think I don't know when CS 1.6 was released, but I know it but I know it became pretty much the standard FPS.
Sometime between StarCraft and Counter-Strike Go.
Yeah, sometime in between. Wow.
Sometime in between. I mean, that's kind of what it is, though, right? We kind of have. I mean, not precisely, but like we kind of have really early esports, then middle where it was like kind of getting bigger, and it was like a normal thing among gamers, but like kind of a taboo thing for normal people, and then normal people, because gamers aren't normal people,
Yeah.
and then yeah, you kind of have the final stage, which is like now, where like people who don't even play the games will like watch the esport. So I mean, it kind of makes sense between.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, sorry. I think compared to the 90s, in the 90s you had a big stigma when you really liked playing games, because then you were that strange nerd that sits in his room all day and just playing video games. And I mean, the stigma has not gone completely today, but like in the 2000s, I remember that when you had somebody like you had school shootings, then politicians and parents were blaming like Counter-Strike, that it made the child violent, and it kind of taught the child how to use firearms and stuff like that. So some bullshit stuff.
Oh man, we'd be in trouble.
And yeah, so I think in the 2000s, as more and more people played the games, like not our parent generation for the most part, but if you compare it to today, I mean, I'm 27 now, so, and in my generation, it's pretty normal to have actually played video games or Yeah, that it's like you can actually connect to people by playing video games, where you meet somebody and then you say, yeah, I like video games, and the guy is saying, yeah, I also like video games. Which genre do you like? And I think that kind of started in the 2000s, as more and more people played video games actually, that the stigma also became less and but like smaller and smaller, because if you have pretty much every teenager playing video games, well, you cannot say everyone is a mass murderer.
Yeah,
uh,
exactly.
and so um, yeah, I think that's also when kind of esport became, or when competitive gaming became esport, because then it like players got sponsors, and some players became something like idols. For example, Fatality for first-person shooters in the US. You had Slayer's Boxer in Korea for StarCraft, which kind of carried the success of the game on his shoulders. And yeah, and I have actually no clue who made esports popular in Germany. Uh, hmm.
Actually,
I
how
know we had.
popular is it in Germany in comparison to like Korea and the US and actually I guess the rest of EU, because I guess it is pretty popular in EU, but
What do you mean by it?
just esports in general, like watching. Actually, mostly CS:GO is like the one that you hear is where EU players are like the best, I think. Because like
I think
everybody makes fun of the NA players in CS:GO because they get shut on. But yeah, um, I don't know. I guess yeah. Actually, how popular is it a big thing in Germany? Just watching esports?
you mean today?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Of course, it is still like Germany's pretty conservative,
Mm-hmm.
and so it has not become that mainstream yet. But I think it's kind of mainstream already. A lot of people play video games, so the acceptance is pretty big.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, it depends on the genre. Um, like I think in Germany, really good player, like you have some really good FIFA players, because football is popular in Germany. So a lot of people actually play FIFA,
Mm.
and there are online tournaments or car racing. So it's kind of strange that like I think the most successful genre in Germany, or for German players, are car racing and football. So pretty much the same genre that real life athletes, so car racers like Michael Schumacher or Michael Schumacher, or how you call it in English.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I mean, that guy's an F1 legend, and yeah, so you have car racing, and then, well, football has always been really popular in Germany. So of course, a lot of people play the football games on console or PC,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, so that's where German players are successful. Else,
Uh-huh.
I think esport in Germany is mostly computers. Um, Not a lot of consoles. I mean, for example, in America, you had Halo FPS tournaments,
Mm-hmm.
but I think in Europe, yeah, I think Halo was never that popular, and people just they continued to play Counter-Strike 1.6. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's very much how it went.
Yeah, I guess the Americans just always want the next big thing, whereas like everybody else is just content with, they're like, no, fuck you, we'll keep we'll keep playing the same thing. It's good enough.
Well, it's not about it's good enough. Just
No, it's actually, yeah.
that.
Sometimes I just prefer it, like in the case of StarCraft
Uh,
and the second
I
one. Yeah,
mean, new doesn't mean better
yeah, exactly.
in every case. For example, well, it's not necessarily esport, but for fighting games, you had there's the Darkstalkers series,
Hmm.
and people actually play the third game in the series, even though there were two like two sequels, but the balance was well not that good. So people prefer to play the older version. Or, for example, for Street Fighter 2, you have Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. So people play the version from, I think 1996. So
Hmm.
the arcade version instead of the HD remix and rebalance and Ultra Street Fighter 2
Yeah.
versions, because they say no, we don't want that balance. We want to play the original.
Hmm.
So that's kind of still the tournament standard.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you have a sequel, it doesn't necessarily mean that actually becomes the better game. I mean, you just need to take a look at Counter Strike 1.6 and Counter Strike Source, uh, where you pretty much split the community. One part saying yeah, 1.6 is godly, it's the best Counter Strike, and then you have Source players where they say nah, Source is better, graphics are better,
Hmm.
and like you have more weapons and stuff. Uh, yeah, so new games can actually kind of split the esport community for a game.
Yeah. And they can kind of, I mean, they can also like crush a game's IP. I mean, have you seen? I mean, if you, well, of course you have, but you know about Command and Conquer 4. It's called Tiberium Wars, right? Um,
Yes.
that that just like ended Command and Conquer. They were like, "Oh, oops, we fucked up. Time to stop making Command and Conquer." After that one,
Yeah,
because
typical EA. That's EA for you.
yeah, I
Yeah,
honestly
but
I
yeah,
don't
sorry.
know. Yeah, I was just gonna say I don't know why they. I mean, would stop, because I mean, if they made a new Command and Conquer, it'd probably do really well. Like especially nowadays after all the RTS crash. I mean, if they
Yeah,
made it.
they wanted to do a general sequel
Hmm.
actually,
Hmm.
but it was cancelled. I
Gotcha.
think because I think they wanted to do something like microtransactions where you buy like generals,
Oh boy.
and then you get like in the original generals. At first, you had three parties,
Hmm.
um, and you had some general powers. So like um, for example, a bomb carpet or like a spy plane and stuff. And then I think they introduced um, split generals where you have special abilities. Like for the terrorist faction, you had like a stealth general where units became invisible and stuff.
Hmm.
So you could play the same faction, but because you had a different general, the units behaved differently. So you had different advantages and disadvantages, and I think they wanted to do more of that
Hmm.
through microtransactions, and then yeah, um, I think it became too expensive, and
Gotcha.
then EA pulled the plug or something like that.
Hmm. Actually, sounds interesting as long as you can get the generals without having to pay. But
No, that's
Well,
EA.
well, yeah. I mean, optimally, you'd be able to do both. And well, actually, I mean, in best case scenario, you get them free. I mean, it sounds kind of annoying in an RTS. I mean, in a game like League where you have to buy the champions, I mean, I can tolerate that, but like in an RTS, it just seems really like seems like a quite a perversion of the genre. I don't know.
Yeah, you can play race 1, but you cannot play race 2, except you pay $10.
How to destroy your game's design 101. Make a paid faction in an RTS.
Yeah, I guess that's one thing. Now that we talk about games that were not that successful, of course, like esport, if you think about esport games today, then you think, oh yeah, Dota 2, and you have League of Legends, and you have Counter-Strike Go, and you have StarCraft 2, but those are kind of it's kind of a survival of the fittest. I mean, StarCraft 2 became an esport hit because of StarCraft Brood War.
Yeah.
And Counter-Strike Go became a hit because of, well, it's Counter-Strike. So you had 1.6 and Source. So it's pretty much sequels. I mean, Dota 2 is a sequel to Dota. LoL is kind of a clone of Dota. So I would say those are also sequels. But then you had also new players that tried to enter the market, or some games that kind of vanished or became not as popular. For example, Quake 3 or Unreal Tournament. I mean, the arena shooter, there were still tournaments, just not as prominent as Counter-Strike.
Yeah.
So you could still make money, but the tournaments, like the skill level was really high, but the prize pool was not as high as compared to Counter-Strike. And then you had games that wanted to be esport. I remember a strategy game called Paraworld from 2006. And so the special thing about the game was that it was kind of prehistoric, and you had 3 different tribes, and it was developed by a German studio, and they wanted to make it esport, and they had ESL tournaments for the demo already. And I played some tournaments for that game, but a lot of people just agreed, yeah, that game is shit. So like they tried the game because I think there was one big developer tournament, so people were like, yeah, maybe I can grab some money from like qualifying for that tournament. But then the sales were so low that the development studio had actually it went bankrupt. So even though like the game tried to push into the esport market, it never hit the popularity to actually become an esport. Like the ratings for the game were all right. I just checked before our podcast. In Germany, it was like an average of 80%, and in the English media, it was like 70%. So it's all right? But just like the game never took off, even though it kind of wanted to get into the esport niche really early on. So like 11 years ago, it just never caught on, and I think there are probably too many games to count that had the same fate like Para World.
Yeah, I wonder how. I mean, it's an interesting idea, like because I wonder how much the actual game's design matters in comparison to the marketing. Because if you think about it, like look at every Blizzard game, each one that's released becomes an esport. Like like I'm not literally, but I mean, for the most part, I mean, like Overwatch got released and it was an esport. StarCraft 2 got released and it was an esport. Hearthstone even is, I mean, almost just about an esport. Um, I mean, so Blizzard like really seems to try to own that area where they kind of like always release a game that can be played competitively and like for money, and like there are pro players for it. So, I mean, and I mean they're designed pretty well. Like, I mean, I think Blizzard's games aren't really my games of choice, but I think that they're fun and they're designed like well enough to be like good. But they also have like some crazy some crazy marketing. I guess everybody's expecting them to make esports at this point, which is I guess one big reason why they end up as like esports with pro players. But yeah, I mean, I'm
Yeah,
not sure.
I think the difference between Blizzard and some random indie game developer is Blizzard has a track record
Mm-hmm.
where they, like, Warcraft 1 and Warcraft 2 were good strategy games, and then StarCraft pretty much invented RTS esport,
Yeah.
you could say, or competitive gaming. And then you had Warcraft 3. Like, Blizzard never pushed the graphics to the maximum
Yeah.
that you could do at that time, but they wanted to make the games be playable on as many computers as possible,
Mm-hmm.
so as many people as possible are able to actually enjoy the game. And for Warcraft 3, I guess um, I guess at that point people were not yet expecting like Blizzard to be the almighty game development studio that pumps out great game after great game. I mean, you had Diablo, you had Warcraft, you had StarCraft. So of course they made good games. But Warcraft 3, it was different from other RTS through the hero system, and so you had stuff like creeping, leveling up your hero unit, and so for people it was just fun to play actually.
Mm-hmm.
And then if the game is fun to play, then people of course stick to playing that game. And to be honest, Warcraft 3 had terrible balance, and it's still terrible. Even today, the balance is pretty bad, I think.
and yet,
Um,
and yet somehow still an an esport evolved out of it.
yeah, pretty much. You had uh, there was like Warcraft 3 died as an esport in Korea
Mm-hmm.
because a Korean map maker changed unit stats in the map editor for the maps that are played in the tournament in secret. Like, because Orc could not win against Night Elf um, on normal unit stats, pretty much. Like, uh, it was always Night Elf winning at that time. Like, Night Elf was dominant. And Orc couldn't win against Night Elf at that time. The map guy for the Korean tournament, he changed like the basic grunt to attack a bit faster, and I think it like he made units regenerate HP a bit quicker, so stuff you couldn't notice right away. Um, and that's how Orc kind of got a bit. It could keep up with Night Elf better, but then it came out that the guy tinkered with the unit stats, and yeah, that was a huge scandal in Korea, and yeah, then
Wow.
that pretty much destroyed the Warcraft 3 esports scene in Korea, in South Korea.
Mm.
At that time, you still have some pro players today from Korea, but from what I read, that yeah, it kind of was the nail in the coffin for that game, because people just couldn't trust the tournaments anymore.
Yeah, that makes
Yeah,
sense.
so that's just one example of how great Blizzard balance can be.
Exactly.
Yeah. Else, I guess today, let's talk about today. Um, I guess people listening to our podcast probably know already which esport games are popular right now.
Yeah, go to
Um,
Twitch.tv and look at the top things, top games,
yeah,
basically.
and I think the difference is just the expectation of the players being different. Um, like Quake 1 was not built to be competitive, I think. Was to be fun. I think the first Quake to be built to be really competitive was Quake 3 because it was just one on one. Even the single player was versus one on one or against bots. And today you have like Quake Champions where they had to add gimmicks like you have a champion with a special ability and like the walking speed and HP are different
Yeah.
between champions and so like if you want to create a game today for esport then it needs something new, I think, because the basic genre recipe has been used so many times that yeah, even if you have the best balanced first person shooter or RTS, if it's like the same boring stuff people played for the past 20 years, uh okay, so it's allies against Soviet Union during whatever World War II or something.
Hmm.
As in RTS, yes, Norfest. I mean, okay, so you got tanks and foot soldiers and yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
boring.
yeah. No, I agree. Actually, I always thought that World War II RTS was not that interesting based on the. I don't know why. I guess I never thought World War II or World War II assets were ever cool. I never really liked the movies or the games or anything. But I don't know. It's probably because I grew up playing too many sci-fi things. So, but I was gonna say, yeah, the thing about games, like you said, with like having to do the new thing, is that people. I mean, it's easy to to think, and actually this happens to me too. You think that a game is like there are lots of games that are the same thing and they're all good, so you just like play each of those. But I mean, the more you think about it, like each game has its own, like each good game that you play has its own way of working. Like even if it's an FPS or third person like hack and slash, like all the genres they add like something. All the games add something new to the genre as long as like if they're a good game, that you just don't see in the other games, and you don't, and like replicating it would not really. I mean, it wouldn't achieve the same thing. It would exist again, but like, I mean, it wouldn't be as interesting because like a different game has already like achieved this unique perspective or unique like mechanic
Hmm.
inside its own like content. And I mean, so like if you were to, I mean, just make a game in general, like you don't just copy something else. I mean, it's not even. I don't even. I think to most game developers, just copying something else isn't even interesting to themselves. Like most people will take inspiration from other stuff, but like add something new to it because there's no real reason to just do the same thing over again.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, no, it's kind of it's hard for me to explain, but I mean, it's just like the concept of like games don't like you don't just see multiple of the same game that do the same thing. Like each one is supposed
Hmm.
to be a unique experience. So I mean, um, So yeah, that's just what I'm trying to communicate there. And so yeah, I think that's what's really attractive about like esports with a new feature added to
Mm.
them. Is that just like people are expecting, to be blasted with some like a new mechanic or a feature or something interesting that's added to the same kind of concept of the game. Uh, so yeah, I think that's a big part of it. Um, and the other thing, actually, since you mentioned like talking about how the players are, they're like Quake Champions has like it has champions in the name, and each character is a champion. I think another huge part of the esports is that you pick a character, and then you can kind of like is resonate. I guess you can resonate with them or like kind of relate to the character in that like even like usually the characters are this very simple like um personality with like these stupid one-liners, but even even with like corny one-liners like ice isn't always nice, stupid stuff like that. Like even with those, like the characters and their stats and all of that get and abilities, they all kind of combine into like a package that you enjoy to kind of identify with whenever you play a game. So like when you hop into a ranked game or like a competitive game, you're like, oh yeah, I'm gonna bring my best self and my best champion, or maybe I'll try a new champion and like show the others, what I got. And that like I think goes for just about
Mm.
any of the esports right now. Um,
Yeah. I guess as a player, you always have to keep an eye on the meta game as well. So
yeah.
also as a developer, I think you have to take a look. You need to keep an eye on the meta game.
Hmm.
So what I mean, for example, in Quake Champions, when you play duel, you need to pick 3 champions. And so if you lose with champion 1, then you pick champion 2 or 3,
Hmm.
um, which you respawn with. And like if everyone picks the same champions, then the risk is really high that the game gets stale.
Yeah.
Um, so for example, if you play in RTS and everyone builds the same build order and the same unit composition, so it's kind of like watching the same game over and over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Then it's really boring. Um, Especially if somebody, for example, in Quake Champions, if you pick different champions, and then it's pretty much an automatic loss, or you're at a big disadvantage just because you did not pick like the best 3 champions. Um, then yeah, it's not fun for the player. Maybe it's fun for the players, because then you just see who's better, right? Because if you use the same characters, then you just see who's the better player. But
Hmm.
as an esport, uh, I bet if you watch League of Legends or Dota or StarCraft 2 or whatever, if you see like in Dota, you had like the sniper, the troll warlord sniper meta game where every team picked sniper or troll warlord, and let's say lion as support. So you like it was like either team A picks that hero or team B picks that hero.
Hmm.
So like the heroes just switching sides, then you're like, oh yeah, okay. When does somebody pick something else? Uh, Especially because I think not many players like actually watching sniper, because that hero is just standing back and, like the name says, sniping.
Yeah.
So far range hero. So he's just keeping distance and shooting away at people, and not very exciting. And as an esport, that can also kind of damage like your game or your popularity.
Yeah.
Sure. If something is boring to watch, like imagine you play an RTS and the best meta game is to be camping for 20 minutes, because if the first guy to attack loses his army, and then the other guy can just push back and win the game from there. So both just sit in their bases or build their expansions, and then after 40 minutes you have like one big fight, and then game over. That's also very boring because there's not much strategy involved, I guess, or not much action to see. So I think for players and developers, metagame is very, very important.
Yeah, I think that's like one reason why it's like sometimes a lot of league players will get irritated with like the current meta, as they call the metagame, where like I don't remember which season it was, but there was this season where basically everybody was just tank, and it was really boring because AD carry was a lot, or marksman, I guess is the official term for it now, was like really not as useful in comparison to like just tanks. So you'd have teams where both teams have, you'd have games where both teams have very high health, high armor, and magic resist champions, where they're just building like tank, and like the fights are a lot slower and like less interesting, just because like everybody has so much health and so little
Nobody
damage.
died that day.
Exactly. Everybody's just attacking siege towers while tanking them and ignoring the enemy team. That would be interesting. But yeah.
No,
I
guess I guess what you can see is that even if it comes to esport, if the game is not fun, then you won't have much success with the game, I think. Like, it must be, if it's fun to play, then people will also watch, and it also needs to be fun to watch for people to actually try the game. So I guess something that esport games are doing right today is that they are kind of attractive for spectators, where you can say, oh yeah, that's interesting or fun to watch, or oh yeah, I like that moment, watching that moment where that one hero team killed the whole other the other squad, even though he was so low HP, and I want to do that. Stuff like that. And I think also a difference today compared to the past in esport is that you have so many patches that like the metagame is changing very frequently. So like in Dota 2, it's always the same map. I mean, they changed it a few times recently, but in theory, you play the same map and just the heroes change. And like the balance changes through patches. So if Troll Warlord was shit last patch, then they buff the hero, and suddenly that hero is really really meta suddenly. Then like the game can change completely. And just there were bad examples of patching as well, like Mortal Kombat 9, where they had stealth online patches. So let's say you are on patch 1.05 on your console or computer, and if you are connected to the internet, let's say Light Punch does 10%. But if you unplug it, if you are offline, then suddenly it does 12% damage. And what NetherRealm Studios actually did was they had stealth patches online where you were still on version 1.05 online, but they said, yeah, that's doing less damage through the server. So when you went to an offline tournament, it could happen that the game was completely different.
Yeah.
Like combos didn't work, damage was different. So yeah, if combos don't work, you practice at home and you go to a tournament, and suddenly it doesn't work. Yeah, that's not good for competitive gaming.
Yeah, that'd be very annoying.
Yeah. So that's kind of a risk of patching too much or having like stealth patches where the user doesn't even know that something got changed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
Yeah.
don't hide info from your players.
Yeah, so sorry. We are in 1 hour and 10 minutes, I guess. Time to wrap up for today.
Indeed.
I guess there's not much to say about esport today. I mean, if you are interested in esport, it's difficult to pack everything into an 1 hour podcast.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess you can read up about like tournaments for the popular games and maybe give some tournaments a watch, like how the commentators actually commentate the game and
Yeah. I think a big
what's
thing.
interesting about the game.
I was just gonna say, I think a big thing about like contributing to like making the game interesting, like fun to watch, is that it's easy to tell what's going on in a lot of the new like esports. Like, I mean, in League there are 5 champions on each side, and there's like two objectives, and then the towers. Like, if somebody gets first turret, they get more money. Obviously, they're doing very well. Or, you know, if one team kills 2 guys and loses 1 champion, well, obviously the team that killed 2 guys, you know, is doing a lot better than the other. So I think that's like a big contributor as well.
Yeah, I agree. So I guess any final comments, Bilal? Anything?
No, that was actually my final comment.
All right. I guess for me, if you are interested in esport, maybe don't just watch the big games, but also maybe more amateur tournaments for smaller games can be really interesting. Especially if you are interested in actually building up your own game as an esport. Then I think you can learn a lot from what people actually watch and what they don't.
Yeah.
And else, yeah, I guess as a kind of a conclusion, compared to the 90s, esports has really become an industry today. And from what I read concerning statistics, it's still growing. So it's also a business opportunity. So maybe even if you're not a game developer, then maybe you're an investor or you are an event organizer, coordinator, planner, whatever. Then I think it can also be a business opportunity for the future.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's pretty much it for me. So thank you very much for listening again. That was episode 13 on Esport, and then I hope you tune in again next week.